Hi, I'm attorney Lorraine D'Alessio here today with my co-attorney, co-counsel here, Joshua Effron.
Hi, I'm Josh Effron. I am an attorney at Immigrant Rep Inc. And I also am of counsel at D'Alessio Law Group. And I am a professor at the University of Laverne, both the College of Law and also the School of Communications. I've been teaching for almost now 8 years, and I've been practicing immigration law for about 23 years now.
He is here today to speak with us about a niche area of immigration law that he has a tremendous amount of expertise in, which is the humanitarian immigration side of immigration law. And why this is so relevant in this time period now is we are in the post-election time where we know that the second term for the Trump administration is coming in. And what does that mean in terms of humanitarian immigration? We are going to be touching upon these fundamental questions today. And one of the most common asked questions right now is for the current policies in place that the Biden administration put in effect, like, for example, the Deferred Childhood Arrival Program, DACA. This program was originally instituted under Obama. It allowed for children under the age of 16 and accompanied by an adult family member into the United States of America to seek status temporarily in the United States. So Josh, what do you think may happen with DACA under the second Trump positioning in government here?
Well, if the first Trump administration is any indication, I have no doubt he's going to try to end it. So first question people ask, how can he end this? This is some legal status. And the answer, it's not a legal status. The D in DACA stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. So the question, what action is being deferred? And that would be removal, deportation. So it's basically a presidential policy. Congress never passed a law. So one president gives, another president could take away. So you would think. President Trump tried to end DACA during his first time around, and the court stopped him. Now, however, he had 4 years in office. He's appointed a lot of the current judges to the bench, as well as justices to the court. So now I could expect a lot of his efforts to overturn DACA may actually be allowed. The same courts that didn't allow it before, they're now staffed with judges that he himself appointed, which means that we're more likely to see it come to an end. What I don't expect to happen because of due process is anybody who currently has DACA, they can't take it away from them. But of course, DACA does expire. I just expect them not to renew it if and when they do cancel it.
So when you say due process, maybe we can just take a moment and sort of greater understand this. So I think what you're saying, if you can correct me if I'm right, is that they very well may take this away, DACA. However, there are a series of steps in place where one can, ensure that they're given due notice, that there would be opportunities to defend oneself, to maybe look if there's any other options available to keep themselves in the United States of America, that there is a process that would be in place and that you have rights in order to bring some defenses. Would that be the case? Yes.
Correct. Absolutely. And one of those things would be, for example, somebody who has what they call a reasonable expectation of getting this. The concept of what we call procedural due process, it applies not only in immigration, but it applies across the board. What they say is if you had a reasonable expectation of getting something, they can't just take it away. So, for example, let's say they canceled Social Security tomorrow and you are just about to get it. You've worked your entire life. They can't say, okay, too bad, so sad, because you've had a reasonable expectation of getting it. Whereas if you're 20 years old, you're just starting in the workforce and they cancel it, well, then okay, a few decades from now, maybe you won't get it because you had no expectation of it. So similarly with DACA, you have an expectation that it's going to be able to be renewed, perhaps because you already put in an application to renew it, perhaps because you've renewed it several times in the past. That puts you in a different position from somebody who's never had DACA or perhaps has only done one renewal ever. So it would be very case specific who would continue to get it and who wouldn't. But ultimately, if it gets canceled, it would be phased out, just not immediately because of these due process concerns. But in the end, if they do cancel it, which I expect to see happen just based on what we saw last time, then I would expect ultimately DACA will become a thing of the past.
Okay. Wow. Wow. That is a lot to take in. But at the same time, it's better to have some kind of an understanding of what may come so that one can prepare and be working with a very qualified, good immigration counsel as ourselves so that we can help you every step of the way in this process to really defend your rights and protect you. So, would you agree with that statement?
Absolutely. And another thing, since you brought this up, to keep in mind is that DACA, like we said, is not a law, it's a policy. So that means it can be ended with the right due process safeguards. Mm-hmm. Other things, however, are actual laws. And a president can't just get rid of something that's a law. That would go through Congress. Mm-hmm. Now, of course, we're now going to have not only a new president, but a new Congress that is very friendly to a lot of the president's policies. Not all, because not everybody is a clone. People have their own views. Just as one example, we saw Senator Rand Paul, who is very much in favor of a lot of the president's policies. He already has said one thing he would not agree to. The president has said he wants to send the military into cities to round up people suspected of being in the country illegally, to remove them. And Senator Paul said, no, I am not in favor of that. So he's actually said, I support the president, but there's a limit on how much I'll support. And that's just one example. We've already just seen that. And President Trump hasn't even taken the oath of office for the second time yet. And we've already seen that. So I would expect to see other things as well, where even a Congress that seems to be in lock and step with him may not necessarily be, which means to get laws changed may be harder than some people think.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And that also means a lot of these laws that are in place to protect people, give them outs from removal, such as we can talk about later, like the U visa, for example, things like that. These are all on the books. Mm-hmm. And the only way to get them off the books is to pass new laws, which would be much harder than people think it would be.
Right. Wow. Very interesting. Now, there was also, I feel like at the 11th hour of the Biden administration, we saw policy in place came in, right? And an opportunity for status to be granted for those who are undocumented but married to those that are spouses but United States citizens. What might happen to these folks now that they might have actually started submitting some of those forms and going there? What do you think?
Yeah, that's a good question. So here's the story. We have this thing that's called parole in place. It's existed for years for example, parents and spouses of U.S. citizens in the military. I've done plenty of applications for that. So question, why is it important? Because the law says somebody who is in the country illegally but entered legally either by being admitted or paroled, the difference doesn't really matter. But the point is they came in. Someone like that, even if they are here illegally now because they overstayed, they can nonetheless get green cards by virtue of being parents or spouses of citizens. However, somebody who entered illegally, absolutely not. They have to leave the country, and that brings up a whole bunch of other issues. So along comes this thing called parole in place, which says we're essentially going to undo history. Yeah, you crossed the border illegally. We're going to basically make it as if you crossed the border legally. You've now been paroled, and they call it parole in place because you don't have to leave the country. So I've done this for spouses and parents of people in the U.S. military. So now what's new is President Biden said, okay, I want to now take this concept, parole in place, that's been around forever, and I want to extend it to people who are just spouses of citizens. Even if these citizens aren't in the military, it doesn't matter. And it would have the same effect. It would mean that they would get parole into the U.S. without having to leave. It would be as if they entered the country legally. However, this was in effect maybe, you want to say 3-4 weeks before the fight went to the court. Finally, November 2024, the courts in Texas, federal courts in Texas said, no, this program is going to be canceled. And so the parole in place for spouses of citizens is no longer. Parole in place for people who are spouses and parents of people in the military, that still exists. They didn't cancel that. Only people who aren't in the military, this new program that President Biden had, which then leads to the next question. What do we do with these applications that have been submitted? since this went into place. It went into place, I guess, around August. November it got canceled. So we've got 3 months of applications and filing fees.
And should they be worried as well now that their names have been submitted? And if they didn't otherwise have them submitted before, now they're before the U.S. government now.
Yes, potentially, yes, in all honesty. And that's where we look at forms of relief that you could ask for in immigration court if you end up there.
So there are avenues to protect.
There are avenues to protect. Nothing is guaranteed in immigration law, but there are avenues to protect because, yes, their names are now out there and they could do what the government could do what they want with those names. And if they want to put people in removal proceedings, important to remember, if they put someone in removal proceedings to send them out of the country, and by the way, removal is simply the new name for deportation. Mm-hmm. I say new, it's been around since 1996, but we'll call it new. Mm-hmm. There are programs in place and people as a general rule have a right to go fight their removal before an immigration judge. And there are things they can ask for in the immigration court. So the fact that someone might be put into removal proceedings doesn't mean tomorrow they're going to be put on an airplane home. They have a shot, and this could end up taking years sometimes. And that number one might mean that they'll be staying here, but number two, that might mean in the meantime we'll get new laws in place, perhaps a new administration, who knows, that could be beneficial to them. Perhaps the current administration, one never knows.
Right. All right. Well, we've talked about policy in place, the changes potentially there. We've talked about DACA. Now, we all probably remember the Remain in Mexico policy as well that the first term of Trump saw. Do we think that this will come back? Do we think that this will affect our relations between the United States and Mexico as well as beyond?
Yes, absolutely. I can see it coming back. So Remain in Mexico, what it is it says if you arrive at the U.S. border, as a lot of people do, they come from Central America, especially, they cross through Mexico, make it to the U.S. border. Traditionally, what happens is at the border, they say, I want asylum. And they say, okay, well, they put them in a detention center in the U.S. and they sometimes parole them out of the detention center. Then they wait out their asylum claim in the U.S. somewhere. That's the traditional way. Remain in Mexico says, the first thing still happens. You make it all the way to the U.S. border. You say, I want asylum. They say, okay, great. Now turn around, wait. There's a refugee camp a few miles down the road. Wait there. We'll call you when it's time for you to cross the border. So basically, you're waiting out your asylum claim in Mexico. The basic policy behind it, I think, is that there was a fear that people who were crossing into the U.S. making asylum claims would disappear into the country and not show up. By the way, statistically, people who have attorneys are far less likely to abscond than people who don't. So perhaps they could have that policy for unrepresented people, but not for represented people, because the fear of them absconding is much, much lower when they're represented, because it means they've already got a vested interest in their case beyond just the potential of winning. So Remain in Mexico says just that. They're going to have to remain in a refugee camp in Mexico. Problem, of course, is, well, got to involve Mexico in that. These people are not Mexican citizens. So what's to stop Mexico from sending them back to their home countries and not having their asylum claims adjudicated? The only answer I can say is that Mexico, like the U.S., is a party to the same treaties about asylum that says you're not supposed to return people to countries where they may have a fear of persecution. Which brings up another problem. Under asylum law, if you pass through a country where you could ask for asylum, you're technically supposed to ask for it there, not in the U.S. So technically, the question would say, why don't they just ask for asylum in Mexico? And for many people, the answer is, well, I didn't leave one violent country to go to another. Mm. But as far as the judges are concerned, and many in the government, they say, well, Mexico is as good a country as the U.S. You could ask for asylum in Mexico. Why not? So Remain in Mexico, the reason why we have it is because essentially it ensures that people are not going to go into the United States, be put in asylum proceedings in court. They say your court date is some point next year, and then the people disappear and never show up. The way they do this is they say, okay, if you disappear, you'll be disappearing into Mexico. You'll be Mexico's problem. Typically, that doesn't happen. If they disappear, they're going to quickly make their way back to the border. So when they can, when it's time for them to cross, it'll be their chance. There are questions about the legality of it because asylum law, unlike a lot of other areas of immigration law, asylum is based on treaty law. U.S. has certain treaty obligations, as do many other countries. That's also, by the way, why asylum is one of the few times where it's not unheard of to cite cases from other countries. I've seen U.S. courts cite the Supreme Court of Canada because they're interpreting the very same asylum law just in their own way, because these laws are so similar, because they're all based on treaty. And because it's based on treaty, sometimes they say the U.S. has to take these people in and give them a chance at asylum. And is remain in Mexico consistent with that? There are arguments that it is not, because they're not taking them in and giving them a chance to have their case heard. There are arguments that it is consistent, because they say, well, we are taking them in, just not right away. So where will it go with the courts will be very interesting to see.
Okay, very interesting. And I gather as well from your comment that there are quite a few forms of relief that are currently in place. And although there may be changes to that, the current avenues for relief right now are things that you are very well versed in, and we as a law firm can support. Could you detail for us some of the options that are currently available for those that could be facing deportation or maybe in removal proceedings? Absolutely.
So someone who is in removal proceedings in an immigration court, there are typically, let's say, 4 things they can ask for. And people often say, well, why don't I ask for other things? And I say, well, because I can't invent the law. The law has certain things on the books, and these are the typical ones. Number 1 is called cancellation of removal, which comes in 2 flavors. One is for people who are permanent residents of the United States. They've committed a crime that renders them removable, and now they want to kick them out of the country. So if I show that they qualify, I may be able to get them to stay. And to qualify, you just show that you've been in the U.S. at least 7 years, at least 5 of which were as a permanent resident, and that you don't have a very high-level crime called an aggravated felony. After that, it's a matter of convincing the judge to exercise discretion. You can stay. Okay, so that's cancellation or removal for someone who's got a green card. The more common kind is someone who doesn't have a green card, and that one's a lot harder. Got to show 10 years in the U.S. You got to show no significant crimes, and the real kicker, you've got to show what they call extreme and unusual hardship, but not to the person who's about to be removed, but rather to their U.S. citizen or green card holding spouse, parent, or child. Extremely difficult. Most cancellation or removal cases are not granted, but there are a fair number that are. I want to say 15, 20% of them maybe are granted. And if you could show that you indeed meet that standard, you could stay. So for example, you've got a U.S. citizen child who's got some very unusual condition that just cannot be treated back in your home country if your child went with you. And the child can't live alone in the U.S. if you went and left your kid behind. So as a result, this is not only extreme hardship, but it's also unusual, because we have to have both. And then if we can prove that, then you can stay under cancellation or removal. So that's number 1. Number 2 is called adjustment of status, which is something you could get outside the court as well. But if you're in proceedings, a judge can adjudicate it. If you get adjustment of status, you show that you are perhaps an overstay, but you are a spouse, parent, or child of a citizen. Or we could show that even if you entered the country illegally, or you're here illegally for some other reason, you did a green card application on or before April 30th of 2001. It's a magic date. And if you did, you're called a grandfathered alien. And then you could do a new green card application now based on something completely different and still qualify after you pay a $1,000 fine. Then the final one is asylum, which also comes in really 3 flavors, we'll say. Asylum, withholding of removal, and protection under the United Nations Convention Against Torture. To get that, the basic thing you want to show is a well-founded fear of persecution, which means you're going to be hurt. But that's not enough. You got to show why you're going to be hurt. It's got to be because of your race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group. So we've got to show, number 1, that you're going to be hurt, which is very hard to show. Then we've got to show why you're going to be hurt, which is even harder to show. So if we manage to show both of those, then we can get the judge to exercise discretion and grant you asylum. If that doesn't work, there's a higher level of asylum called withholding of removal, where same thing, we've got to show one of those 5 reasons you're going to be hurt. But now instead of showing a well-founded fear of persecution, we've got to show a virtual guarantee that you're going to be persecuted. If we can show that, then the judge must let you stay. But a major difference, asylum can get you a green card. A year after you get asylum, you can get a green card, which 5 years later leads to citizenship. If all you get is withholding or removal, they just give you a work permit and we can renew it every year, but that does not put you on a path to citizenship. And then the last one, Convention Against Torture, we got to show a virtual guarantee that the government of your country will torture you. Very difficult again, but it is possible. By the way, all three are the same application, same form, same application. And if you get Convention Against Torture relief, then again, you get a work permit that gets renewed every year, but you're not on a path to citizenship. Mm-hmm. And then the fourth thing is not really a form of relief, but it's kind of one of those better than nothing. Many people qualify for is called voluntary departure. And yes, departure, you do indeed depart the country, but you don't have the harsh burden that comes with having been removed from the country, which means you could potentially come back later if you later qualify for something else. Whereas if you got ordered removed, then you're going to have to get waivers to come back because you were in fact removed. If you get voluntary departure, you leave without that, but you still leave the country, which is why I hesitate to call it exactly a form of relief, but it's kind of one of those things we try to ask for in the immigration court, unless a person just doesn't qualify for it.
I've discovered and I have observed with immigration law that winning cases often are more than half the battle won when the client is very much collaborating and assisting the attorney. It's a collaborative relationship there. And when we come to establish the fundamental evidence and supporting documentation around well-founded persecution, well-founded fear, these bases that we use to make the winning criteria and the evidence supporting that, would you comment on how clients can help with that kind of supporting evidence? Because obviously they know what their original country conditions were like. They know where they are, their story, their narrative, as well as that supporting information. So what kind of strategic things can clients think of doing to be supportive to their attorneys and collaborative in that process?
Oh, good question. Yes, clients are crucial for this because with asylum, what you're not going to get is a country writing a letter saying, yes, if you send your client back to our country, we will persecute him. That's not going to happen. So what you're going to need is evidence, some kind of secondary evidence that whatever the client says happened back home really did happen and that things are likely to happen in the future. And that's where the client is crucial because, for example, the client says, they beat me this way and I went and got medical attention. Great. Bring me the stuff from the doctor that shows that you got this medical attention. I was arrested by the police in my country. Okay. Show me the arrest report. I've been threatened if I go back that I will be put in prison. Okay. How are you threatened? Oh, the police sent me a letter. Bring me the letter then. I've had times, believe it or not, where clients have said these things happen and they can't produce any writing. So then I end up having to go to immigration court and just basically try to tell the judge to believe the client based on nothing other than my client seems credible. But theoretically, that's possible. You're not legally required to produce evidence, but good luck winning your case that way. So the client bringing in documents is absolutely crucial. What the lawyer can do is supplement that. For example, the State Department puts out country reports that are pretty much a required part of an asylum application. So we submit those. We also try to do research and find newspaper articles about the situation in the country. Client says, people of my religion are persecuted. Okay, well, there are probably articles that people of this religion are persecuted in the country. We can get those. But the client says, this happened to me personally. I don't have those documents. That's what the client is for.
Mm-hmm. Well, yes. And actively, perhaps, especially if they have any existing relationships in their country of origin, perhaps some of that documentation is back at home somewhere. Perhaps a family member might have had them. Kind of gathering together family members, brainstorming what might be there, and perhaps even holding some meetings with your immigration lawyer so they can talk with some of those family members to help to jog some of these memories can make the difference between a winning case and a struggle. So an uphill battle. Would you agree?
Absolutely. and the family members back home, they can email or fax over these documents. They've got them. They won't be the originals, but at least it's something. If they have the ability to mail the originals, and it depends on the post in these countries. Some of these countries, they open up the mail, they check it, and that'll put people at risk, so we can't do that. But if they can at least fax or email stuff, at least we have copies. Another thing a client can produce, by the way, are friends who are in the US or other countries who have gotten asylum for similar reasons. I had a client once who had a friend from the home country. This friend had gotten asylum in Italy. So this friend was now an Italian citizen, but had gotten asylum there. So we flew the friend out from Italy to say, yes, I got asylum in Italy because I'm originally from the same country. The same things happened and the Italians granted me asylum. So said just like what happened to me is likely to happen, which is why the Italians granted me asylum. It's also likely to happen to your client. And this helped me win the case.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So it's very important.
Very good. Very good. Now, we may also recall in the first Trump administration that there were actual country bans. So certain country nationals could not attempt to even enter the border, even as visitors, or even to make an asylum claim at the border because of where they originated from. Do you think that list of countries that Trump had identified as not permitted to enter the U.S. Their country nationals will be resurrected? Oh, yeah.
Whether or not to let a foreigner into the country is considered a matter of complete discretion of the country. So if the U.S. wanted to, we could say no foreigners are ever allowed to come in. I don't ever see them doing that, but theoretically they could. This cannot apply, of course, to U.S. citizens, nor can it apply to people who are already here as permanent residents. But putting them aside, someone who wants to come here as a tourist or on a student visa or anything else that's not a permanent resident, they can be banned, legally speaking.
So would you say that for those of you who may be from some of those countries, as we do remember, some of the countries on that list were from Nigeria, the Sudan, Iran, and the list goes on. Now is the time to enter. Now is the time to submit applications and explore all immigration options if it is indeed a goal for you to come to the US for your immigration dreams, and not after the Trump administration gets in place come January, February. So we have some time now, and you have a full-fledged full-service immigration law firm at your disposal who has successfully gone through and protected our clients in the last Trump administration, who are here to help you and to protect your rights and protect your family unification, all during this time period. So I would encourage you to think about the timing and to be sensitive around that so that we can indeed help. Would you agree?
Yes. There are, they called this, I don't think that it was properly named, but they called this a Muslim ban. And it really wasn't, because there were people from Muslim countries that were able to come, because not every Muslim country was on the list. It happens, though, that the countries on the list were all Muslim countries, but there were plenty of Muslim countries that weren't on the list. Having said that, absolutely, I can see that list being resurrected. I can see that list being expanded. For example, incoming President Trump has said that he's got issues with China, which is, of course, not a Muslim country, but he's got issues. Okay. Could he then say there's going to be a ban on people from China coming in? I could see that happening potentially, as an example. So if you are from any country that used to be on the list, as well as if you're from a country that has been targeted by the incoming president, you may, exactly as Lorraine said, consider coming to the U.S. now in the next 2 months, while it's a bit easier to do so, rather than waiting and who knows what will happen afterwards.
Trump has been quite outspoken that he is going to institute a massive deportation. He is deporting, it appears, those that he deems illegal in the United States of America. Potentially, perhaps this may also include people that are overstaying their status in the United States as well. Do you think that Trump will do this fairly soon after he comes into power? Where do you think it is on his priority list?
Very high. Immigration is one of his top priorities. So much so he's basically said, I don't see this happening, but he said the day he takes the oath of office, there is going to be the biggest mass deportation in U.S. history. I don't know if that's his exact words, but I'm paraphrasing essentially. Now, can he actually do that literally that day? Well, number one, we have to go and find all these people. We don't know everyone's status. And what you can't do is you hear someone with maybe an accent speaking another language. You can't just assume, therefore, the person is, number one, not here legally, or number two, not even a citizen, because there have been plenty of cases of mistaken identity there. So how do you, number one, figure out who is in the country illegally? That's problem number one. And problem number two is the logistics. Senator Rand Paul has already said he supports a lot of what President Trump wants to do, but he would oppose the idea of bringing in the military to cities to go and enact this mass deportation. So how would you do it? Do we have enough ICE officers? Many administrations have said, okay, since we can't focus on everyone, our focus is on criminals. So if you commit massive crimes, we're going to focus on you. Whereas if you're here in the country illegally, but all you're doing is working, yes, you're here illegally, and we may come and get you at some point, but you're not our focus right now. President Trump, the first time around, his focus was literally on anybody here illegally, whether they were committing crimes or not. So I can see that being the focus again. Where the resources are going to come from to do that, though, I do not know.
With a mass deportation, Attorney Josh Effron, what kind of reliefs do we have? What kind of legal instruments do we have at D'Alessio Law Group with our legal team to be able to fight back and protect our clients?
Okay. Well, there are a few things that are on the books right now. Immigration court, we have a few forms of relief: cancellation of removal, adjustment of status, and asylum. Those are our main forms of relief in immigration court. We have other things. If someone is a victim of a crime, there's something called a U visa. If we could show someone was trafficked into the U.S., there's a T visa. These are all possible avenues of relief. And people get these, they cannot be removed from the country. But every situation is unique and individual. There are potentially other things, depending, maybe person came into the country illegally long ago, person might qualify for other things based on that. And we would just have to analyze it. But bottom line, things are not as bleak as they may seem, because there are things in the law that we can look for. And we would just analyze a person's situation, say, I think we can get you this, maybe that. And what we always do is we ask for every possible thing. And they say, okay, we're going to deny this form of relief and this form of relief, but we're going to grant this one. And generally the client doesn't care which one is granted, has the same result, they get to stay.
In my time practicing immigration law, and I think what's vitally, vitally important to remember as we enter into the second term for Trump with in terms of governing the United States of America is that it's not just option A, option B, option C in terms of what different option we can go for immigration. It's often a navigating several steps that get you from A, then to B, then to C, and then to D. And there is also a timing factor which can play into our favor. It is very much about legal strategy and not so much about a quick answer. I have found that when you jump to conclusions too quickly on what may be the option, you can miss key details that will help a client and make all the difference in navigating that careful pathway to ultimately what their immigration goal is, which for humanitarian immigration is often to remain in the United States and to ultimately find permanent residency and to citizenship. So we want to keep this in mind. We are entering a 4-year term for Trump. And there are many types of reliefs that we have available. And those can trigger a timing to those. And sometimes it's not just applying for one relief, but potentially even applying for multiple reliefs. So I encourage you to sit down with us and we'll do an extensive consultation of your circumstances, and we will help you hand in hand to go through your A to Z to help you with your immigration goals. It's not a time to be fearful. It's a time to get your A team together and to think of your attorney as a strategic partner in this journey to finally get to your immigration goal. Our website is dalessio.law, D'Alessio.law.